Hi, I'm Laurie Yoler, and I'm also on the NACD Northern California board. And on behalf of NACD and NACD Northern California, I just wanted to thank Cooley for being the incredible sponsor and for this event and for being such a tremendous asset to the technology industry in Silicon Valley.
Sure. Thank you for that, Laurie. My name is Nicholas Dumont. I'm a partner at Cooley in New York. I'm a member of the firm's Public Companies and Capital Markets Group, as well as a founding member of the firm's AI task force. And on behalf of the firm, we're really thrilled to be sponsoring this talk, which is really, I think, of utmost importance to every board member in the country. So thank you for participating and for being here. We're all thrilled to have you. With that, I'll turn it over to Patrick.
Thanks a lot, Nicholas. I will join Laurie in thanking you and Cooley for your generous support in sponsoring this panel. Thank you very much. The title of the session is Should Boards Use Generative AI? Now, in a few minutes, I'm going to ask our panelists whether that's a rhetorical question, and it's an obvious yes answer, and perhaps the better question is how should boards be using generative AI? And I think we'll dive into that. But for now, I have the privilege of introducing two amazing panelists. I'm going to start with Laurie Yoler, who you just met briefly. She's a partner at Playground Global. She's a board director at Bose, Church and Dwight, and as she mentioned, the NACD NorCal chapter, as well as Saltbox. She's also on the advisory board of several companies, including Aptiv, Accenture, AI for All, and TTI Vanguard. What else should we know about you, Laurie?
Well, I actually started my career as an AI programmer in the 80s and got to deploy a lot of really fun, what is considered old AI applications and models. And so it is great fun for me to see the tremendous evolution of what's happened in AI.
Well, okay, I'm going to share a fun fact about you because I think it's really important for this panel. I understand that you have created an AI-based mortgage loan analyzer, an AI-based help desk, and an AI-based medical diagnosis tool for doctors. Is that true?
It is true, all back in the 80s. So
okay, what an amazing addition to the panel. It's great to have you here. Okay, moving on to Nora. Nora Denzel is the lead independent director at AMD. She's also a board director at General Digital, Norton LifeLock, and the NACD National organization. Nora, what else should we know about you?
What should you know? Laurie's bragging. So AI has been around since like the 40s or 50s. So in the 80s as well, I was a programmer. We called it knowledge-based systems. That was the state of the art, if you remember, in AI. But I hung out at the data layer. So I'm very skilled in the moving of unmovable data sets. We had a data set class called Unmovable, and I learned how to move it. So that's my claim.
That's great. I have a fun fact about you. I understand that you are the only panelist here today that's graced the cover of a magazine. And you were on the cover of Computer Storage Magazine in 1997.
Oh my God, if you have your copy, I'll sign it. Yes, I was.
Okay,
sorry.
Wonderful. After the session.
Okay, thank you.
Everyone, I'm Patrick Huston. I'm also delighted to be here. I'm a retired Army general. I'm now a technology lawyer here in San Francisco. I'm on the FBI's AI task force, the American Bar Association's AI task force, and I'm on the board of Quantum Shield, which is a private cybersecurity company. My fun fact for you is that I grew up in Los Angeles, and I was on the movie set of Karate Kid as an extra. My movie career obviously did not pan out, so now you know why I joined the Army. Okay, let's dive right into the substance of this. Laurie and Nora, I'm going to ask you each whether you're an AI optimist like Bill Gates or an AI pessimist like Elon Musk. And then also that question I mentioned at the beginning, like, should this be how generative AI versus should boards be using generative AI? Let's go to Laurie, you first, then I'll share my answer to that, and then we'll go to Nora.
Okay, perfect. I am definitely an AI optimist for a number of reasons. You know, I guess the biggest is that I think AI can continue to automate tasks that humans really are not meant to perform and save humans time, which is our most precious resource, obviously with some guardrails and boundaries around it, which I'm sure we'll talk about. And of course, it was fun doing this, and I was chatting with some folks the other day. I was having dinner with another director of a large public company, and I said, "So how are you using AI?" And she looked at me and said, what do you mean? And I said, "And how are your companies using AI, and how are you governing AI?" And I started walking her through the things I was doing, and she said, "No one does that." And so I think this is a perfect topic, because I absolutely think that we should be talking about experimenting AI in the boardroom and beyond, because how do we govern where technology is going and how incredibly powerful this technology is if we don't understand it and use it ourselves? So I absolutely am an optimist.
Great. I will share that I too am an AI optimist, and I'm really curious to hear Nora's answer. Was it going to be unanimous, or is she going to be the antagonist here and give us a different perspective? I'll say, I'm not naive. I know you can't just sprinkle AI pixie dust on everything and it's perfect. There are risks with AI, and I know we're going to talk about those risks, but I believe that they can be mitigated and that the overall net benefit of using AI outweighs those risks. Nora, what's your take on this?
Yeah, I would say it's hard to say polar opposite or pessimist. I call it rational optimist, meaning that in the long run, it's just like the stock market. In the long run, the trajectory is very positive. Whenever we introduce new technology, whether it's the car or electricity, in the long run, it's great. But I'm very mindful of the things that could put it on a slower trajectory. And we're going to probably talk about all of those. Privacy. I personally was shocked when they released GPT into the wild. I was really shocked. Those of us, Laurie included, you're in AI forever, seeing GPT-1, seeing how it's coming, I never thought it was just going to be released to every employee of every company. But in hindsight, it probably got the discussions of AI into the hands of many, many, many more people. And the positives will outweigh the negatives, even though I couldn't believe they did it.
Now that's perfect. That actually tees us up perfectly for our next couple of topics. I know we're going to talk about those risks, the scary stuff of AI, but I want to put that on hold for just a minute and start off with some of the advantages of AI, like the things that we can be using it for in the boardroom or the C-suite, to help with corporate strategy or any other business use out there. So I'd say let's reverse the order now and start this time with Nora, and then to you, Laurie.
Sure. So I thought I would give you some examples. I think this should have been how to use AI in the boardroom. E&Y just did a survey, and I saw the results, and I think almost 50% of the boards that they surveyed said they were already using it in the boardroom or had plans to use it in the near future. So that's the latest E&Y survey. But if I look back, I'll just give you two examples, and we can talk about all the advantages. The first time I heard about AI in the boardroom, meaning more of the kind of generative AI, not the older stuff that I worked on, came out of Hong Kong. I'm sure you've heard about it. It was Deep Knowledge Ventures. It's a narrow fund it's a big fund, but it narrowly invests in biotech, which has a huge failure rate. So they created an AI model, and then in the industry we call it fine tuning. So you have a general model, like you've all used Chat GPT. Fine tuning means, okay, we sent it to the school on one topic. And so GPT is a good generalist. They made this an incredible specialist. And so they said they elected it to their board, and they wouldn't invest unless it also voted for that investment. So that was in 2014, and
they elected an AI entity to the board.
They elected it to the board. However, when you look at Hong Kong corporate law, and we'll talk about disadvantages and things, this will actually become more interesting and more relevant to you as we go on, especially you, is, Hong Kong law doesn't really allow for that in their corporate governance framework. So in theory, it was an observer status. So we all can elect observers, and there's no precedent that they have to be protein. They could be silicon. And so it was an observer status, but it did vote on what they should invest in. Subsequent to that, Abu Dhabi has also done that in one of their huge funds. It's the Abu Dhabi International Holding Company. And it continuously, what they say is it continuously processes in the boardroom, processes decades worth of data. So then everybody lately has been chiming in. You've heard Benioff saying, I have an AI in my corporate CEO suite. So when we do an operations review, we have AI telling me, okay, which of these executives should be coached and how after this meeting? What do you think about the forecast? What's the probability of hitting it? And so it's a real conversational piece rather than someone typing in the corner. So I would say in summary, in the boardroom, when we think about AI, there's the topology is 3 levels. One is AI assisting your decisions? Then there's AI augmented, which the Deep Ventures Fund did in Hong Kong, meaning that I'm on the board, you're on the board, and this agent now legally is not on the board, but they're an observer and can vote, but we haven't delegated all of our votes. And then some people believe that over time, we'll get to autonomous, meaning we will have a diverse board of this investor sent his bot and that one sent her bot, and we've got a board that has been kind of outsourced to AI. We're not there yet, but I do think the discussion should be on how should AI assist us, for better decision making. And then, as Laurie said, on boards to take minutes, to summarize the action items, to take a board pitch, and you can ask AI, give me the top 3 items, to summarize analyst reports. It's almost like every board member in the world got assigned an intern, a really good generalist intern, and a sometimes okay specialist. So I'll pause there.
No, that's great. You remind me that I recently read an article that a Polish company had appointed a GenAI agent as its CEO. And I don't know how that's working out, but I'm super curious to hear about it. Laurie, what about you? What do you see as the advantages of GenAI for boards?
So, first and foremost, better decisions. But then quickly efficiency and productivity gains. At one of my last board meetings, I went to the CIO and said, how are you using it? How are people using it? And he showed me how he had actually used it to generate his slides from a thick memo that he had written on information, and had, in this case, Azure AI do a first rev of the slides for the board. And it was fabulous in that just even the look of the slides were so much more engaging without 1,000 words on the page, and it got to the succinct, more important things that he really needed to get across. So he was saying for a first draft, it saved him hours and hours and hours of time of trying to present information to the board in a summarized fashion. I took Nora's advice and suggested that after our recent earnings call for one of my boards, that they in this case, they use ChatGPT and 2 other tools to summarize all the earnings reports, so that right after the earnings call, we got a very quick summary as a board of everything that had been said. And of course, you're not dealing with the data leakage or proprietary information. It's taking these public documents that are the analyst reviews of the earnings call and summarizing them quickly so the board doesn't have to read every single report in its entirety. And then you can see exactly where things fall. That was a great idea. And then the biggie for me was in benchmarking. Again, back to making better decisions, but even asking better questions. So as I was reading a very lengthy board pack recently, I had a second screen next to me and was using my new favorite tool, Perplexity AI, and typing in questions the entire time. So for example, I would see a number in a financial statement and I would type in, what is the average percentage range for this industry for this metric? And so I was able to quickly see, gosh, are they doing well? Are they doing poorly? How do they benchmark against other companies in their industry? And, a sub-second response. And so it was really great for me to both augment my learning as well as to benchmark the company at the same time while reading the board pack. So those are just a few examples, but I think it can provide tremendously powerful support for board members and executives in preparing for boards.
That's great. I want to tell a story about a company that used AI as its central business model in a very successful way. It's called the Ant Group, and it is an online bank with a very fresh vision. When it came on the scene a few years ago, it had a new way of processing loan applications. Essentially, its business model was simple but ambitious, best described as 3-1-0. It would take their customers an average of 3 minutes to fill out an online loan application. They would process that application within 1 minute and deposit the proceeds in the person's bank account if the loan was approved. And then the zero is 0 humans on the company side involved in typical transactions. Now, the only way it can do something like this is through the power of AI. And the Ant Group achieved this ambitious goal. It's now one of the world's largest financial institutions and the world's largest digital payment platform. And so the Ant Group now has 2 billion customers and less than 10,000 employees. And that ratio is, again, only possible through the magic of AI. Now, most people haven't heard of the Ant Group. That's because they're in China. They are the financial arm of Alibaba, which is China's version of Amazon for the most part. But regardless, I think it's a great example of the power and the potential of AI, and something that I think board members need to understand regardless of the industry. So I guess with that, the next thing that we need to talk about are the risks or the disadvantages of AI. So I think let's just stick with the same order. We'll go Nora and then Laurie again.
Sure. So I kind of touched on it a little bit. A lot of the legality of all this is a little murky. In fact, so it's interesting on the Ant Group. I thought Gary Gensler in the US was saying, if you're going to give advice without human intervention on finance and make money off of it, I thought he said he's coming for us. Maybe there's somebody on the call that saw his, I remember him saying that. So to have no human in the loop, it's a little bit murky now. I mean, if there's some damage and this AI bot did it, like you declined me for a loan, so we're going to see a lot of novel precedents coming up at some point. Do you blame it on the AI? But to go back to the basics on, obviously all of you on the call know how it works, is you feed the computer a ton of data, like billions of pieces of data, it processes it millions and millions, billions of times. But the algorithms are written by the computer. And so they lack something called explainability, which means they could be biased, but you might not have somebody that can explain why they gave me the loan and they didn't give it to Patrick. And so explainability is something you want to understand, and bias. How are we preventing bias? The other thing is privacy, as Laurie was talking about. They were using Azure, which is phenomenal. It's cloud-based. So you just, I would never put a board deck of my own that's confidential in the cloud. It's just like a Google query. Google knows more about us than we do, because we query, what are the symptoms of a cold or whatever. So your queries somebody gets them. So privacy is is another risk. So I would say those 3 things, especially anything around copyright and IP, it's very murky. Second is privacy, third is bias. And so Laurie, okay, I took those from you. What ones do you have?
Okay, so many more. And I will give a shout out to Cooley to follow up. I was just reading right before they just sent an email entitled "The USPTO, the Patent and Trademark Office, offers guidance on inventorship for AI human collaborations." So the question is, if you enter a really interesting prompt, is the prompt itself an invention? And how does all that work? And Cooley just wrote a wonderful report on that. Is designing, building, or training an AI system or constructing a prompt an invention? When is it not? So, it's just, there's so much around this. So anyway, you should read their briefing. I thought it was very well written. So certainly, you talked about bias, always a huge concern. I think the others are, yes, the data leakage. So the Samsung example was one that came out early, where You know, you could be taking either just the prompt or actually putting code out to get the code analyzed for errors. Where are you putting that? And I mentioned Azure. Microsoft and the other cloud vendors will create personal instantiations for an enterprise. So you're not sending it out to ChatGPT where it is going outside of the enterprise boundaries. They will instead come and create a personal cloud for you using Azure or whatever the tools might be, depending on the vendor, so that you can have what we called in the olden days an intranet, but a query and internal knowledge base of all of the company's data. Companies like Goldman Sachs are taking all of their internal data and analyses, combining them with all the external SEC filings and financial data, and creating a tool for all of their clients where they're combining internal and external. But data leakage, huge concern. Cyber, of course, you know, one of the beauties of generative AI is it generates stuff really fast. Well, the downside of that is that means cyber criminals can generate more deep fakes, as well as much more clever phishing attacks using generative AI. So huge concern. Accuracy and accountability of the data. I'm sure you've heard of the hallucination. So what is the accuracy? Which is, again, one of the reasons I like Perplexity, is it shows the sources of the information that it comes, which goes back to provenance and source. What is the source of the data? What is the provenance? Companies like Adobe have created a group of companies getting together to be able to come up with a standard for tracking the provenance of the data or the art or whatever the object is. And then, of course, the last one would be the skills gap in terms of the haves and have-nots. Is it just going to be the very large companies that can afford the very expensive models and can afford the power to and the GPUs to power those expensive models that make the most use of this? Or can small companies or other kinds of non-technology enterprises compete?
Yeah, I will say that the two of you covered my 4 topics, which were privacy, hallucination, job displacement, and cyber. Also, I'll just briefly hit, kind of augment your points there on the privacy risk. As a company, to put your intellectual property or other trade secrets out there for your competitors to get can be devastating to the company, but also your client data or other confidential information, whether it's HIPAA, if you're in the healthcare industry, those can lead to just massive fines and devastate your business, plus the reputational harm when you have a breach like that. On hallucinations, you know, just ask the lawyers out there who use ChatGPT to create briefs that made up cases that did not exist. They were sanctioned for that, appropriately so. On the job displacement, I know this is one where I know it's going to displace some jobs. There will be some individuals affected. I said I'm an optimist. I do believe that they will create more jobs than it loses, and those jobs will be more elevated jobs, and in often cases better paying jobs. But there will be some individuals. We need to have an upskilling plan for that. And then finally, the cyber vulnerabilities. I couldn't agree with you more, Laurie. I think that's a significant issue we need to look at. You know, we've talked about the advantages, we've talked about the disadvantages. This is a crowd that really likes to have practical advice, practical guidance, some key takeaways that they can go back to their boardrooms with and improve the way their companies do business. So I'm going to ask, well, let's switch around the order a little bit. Let's go with Laurie and then Nora this time. Can you share a couple practical tips or some guidance that these board members can take back with them?
Absolutely. One of the biggest ones that a lot of companies are concerned about right now is, how do you educate the rest of the board? You've got a bunch of technologists and cyber experts right now speaking, and I see a lot of friends who have joined this webinar who I know are extremely both tech savvy, cyber savvy, and AI savvy, but a lot of boardrooms do not have folks who are savvy. And so the question is, how much do you need to educate the board? Does everyone need to get educated? What about the leadership team? And so a big question that I am constantly thinking about is, how do I best educate the board? You know, much like cybersecurity, really the brunt of it falls to the audit committee. And I would assume most audit committee members do continual education around cyber. What is the right education? And so what I have done on a number of my boards together with the leadership team is to bring in all the cloud vendors as well as other consultants into the board on a regular basis. And we trade off between lots of them to come into the boardroom. And instead of do a what is AI, which most board members should read a basic article or watch a webinar like this, bring them in to say, please let us know what are the most interesting use cases in our industry. And most of them now have industry specialist groups. And so the head of that group can come in and say, let me tell you everything that's happening in consumer electronics today, or everything that's happening in semiconductor manufacturing, or whatever it is, or in biotech, to come into the board and educate you on use cases. But equally as important, we did that for one of my boards, but then afterwards, everyone on the board said, okay, well, what are we doing, right? This company. And so very important to either have before or after, or in conjunction, have the internal leaders talk about what the company is actually doing. And maybe they could provide an education session for the board, but the internal groups are equally as important to have in the boardroom to have that discussion and be ready to have that conversation after hearing from some of the external companies. And then I think it's, most companies are in the experimentation phase. And so really important to find out, how are we experimenting? How are we thinking about data? Hey, have you seen that your competitor X did this? Have you considered that? Why or why not? And then the biggie for me is talking to each of the back office functions like legal and finance and say, hey, there are hundreds of tools out there. Have you experimented with any of these? Have you done any document summarization? Have you done any generation? And so I will just, when I'm at board meetings or at board dinners, go talk to each of the functional leaders and find out what they're up to. Are they stuck because they feel uncomfortable? Do they not know the right tools vendors? Are they expecting introductions? And really find out where they are.
Perfect. Nora, what's your take on this?
Yeah, that was awesome. I wrote out a bunch. So the number one I put was education, just like Laurie. And I was thinking, looking at the list of the people on this list, in our boards as well, we've had people come in. Some are fantastic. Some are really technical. Some are the use cases. I would urge us in the audience, whenever we get a great speaker, to share it. Not necessarily, their thoughts, but just share who it was, that we all could do that. So we've had them at every board dinner this year, this rolling year. So we've done a lot of that. I would say continuous education. And then to Laurie's point about the use cases, I think you have to also have an ethics and a governance framework, meaning how do we pick the use cases? Do we just let everybody on the front line use ChatGPT at their will? And so how do we decide who uses generative AI and when? Now, a lot of the products we buy, maybe Salesforce, for example, with Einstein, has AI inside. Have we changed our procurement process to ask those questions about privacy and bias and where the data goes and where it came from, et cetera? Almost like we're hiring an employee. Does this product adhere to the ethics and the standards we have at our company? Also, if you have a consultant come in and they're going to do a big AI model on your data, do they then use the gist of your data to educate someone else? So understanding how procurement changes in there. So on the before you audit all the use cases, which I do think is a great thing to do, is make sure from a board perspective, just like cyber, you ask them, what framework do we use? So what's our ethics and governance framework for all the things we talked about, unbiased output, making sure that communications that we create with generative AI doesn't cause the company reputational harm. And so are there guidelines and boundaries around that? And how are we ensuring that humans are still in the loop? But I think if I don't understand how you select use cases and I'm governing and I'm giving oversight on use cases, I don't know if that was a good one to select or not, if I don't know what your thinking was. I also have seen kind of premature board questions, meaning if a board director asks the right question at the wrong time, sometimes that's the wrong question. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of experimentation going on. It's like a free love era of data and people thinking about new products and new ways. But then I see some board directors asking about the market size, the ROI, the profitability, the business model, which are the absolute right questions. But when you're in the lab and you're experimenting, a lot of these models have just like things that just happen that the person using it didn't even know that it was capable of doing, emergent things. Very hard to sit there and pin what the business model will be. No one predicted how the internet was really going to go. So I would say, again, the ethics and governance framework, which one are you using? How did you pick it? Is it from the World Economic Forum? Did you get it from another source? And then the final thing I would say, well, two more, sorry, there's three, but the self-regulation. We're going to have to self-regulate because the laws are just going to take a long time to catch up. And so a lot of people ask, what does that really mean? I just think it's really what we were taught in grade school. Of if you couldn't put it on the front page of the Wall Street Journal, you probably shouldn't be doing it. But we're going to have to self-regulate until regulations catch up. And finally, if you don't know where to start with your data. Do you have a governance model? Do you know who owns it? Do you know where it is? Do you know how it's protected? Great AI is great data. And if you haven't really paid attention to the data, that's a no regrets move to understand that.
Right. Fantastic input. I will add two more tips for board members. Human-machine teaming and improved cybersecurity posture. On the human-machine teaming, it's tied to what you just mentioned, Nora, about humans in the loop versus humans outside the loop. I see a lot of people posing this as, are you going to go with the humans or are you going with the machines? And I think, like I know you do, it's not that simple. That's a false dichotomy. You can have both and you can have the best of both. The secret is to figure out what things humans do better than machines and let humans do that. Figure out the other things that the machines do better, let them do that, and then put them together in a way that leverages the respective strengths of each. That's human-machine teaming. And the management team's responsibility is to make sure that they're doing that. Our oversight responsibility is to kind of make sure that they're keeping that framework in mind. The second one is improving cybersecurity posture. We all know that a good strategy needs both a good offense and a good defense. And we've talked about all the ways that companies are leveraging AI to improve operations, to increase productivity, to cut costs. And those are all great. That's all part of the offense. The defense, as we mentioned, needs to be cybersecurity, because that leveraging of AI increases your cyber vulnerabilities, your cyber attack surfaces, and you just need to have a commensurate plan and not an afterthought to build that up. It can be something like having obviously you have to have your suite of cybersecurity software, but there are other simple tasks like strong passwords, double authentication, and having cyber insurance at the strategic level for your company that are just good rules of thumb. So there, I think I'm really pleased with those tips that you provided. I wrote down quite a few of those, and I'm going to use those as well. Now we've hit on this a little bit, how boards are supposed to not actively participate in management, but to maintain an oversight role. We've all heard the nose in but fingers out thing. So along those lines, can you offer any additional questions that boards should be asking their C-suites about when it comes to AI or generative AI? Let's go with you first, Laurie.
Great. And you were talking about human-machine interface, Patrick. One other thing I would add is don't forget about actuation. AI is a brain in a jar until it impacts the physical world. So don't forget about things like robotics and automation and all of those things that maybe could be used in supply chain and distribution and manufacturing. There's more and more AI being added to that right now. You've seen the big surge in funding in humanoid robotics recently, and a lot of press about it. So don't forget that piece of AI. It's not just text and beautiful pictures and images. But back to your question of how do we as a board oversee AI? I think it comes down to what great board members are great at. It's asking the right questions at the right time. And I also want to highlight what Nora said. I've been following the financial institutions, the large ones, especially investment banks, are always early adopters of technology, because if you think about it, they're digital businesses and speed is everything and efficiency is everything. So they're great leading indicators, and I've seen all of the large investment banks give presentations recently, and one of them was talking about the fact that the one question you don't want to be asking right now is what's the ROI? Because we are in experimentation, and the thing that will stop a business leader from trying to imagine what could be done and trying to experiment is if they also have to write a business case alongside it. It's problematic for them to think about that right now. At some point, you're absolutely, if they are coming asking for $1 billion experiment, then there is a question of what's the ROI, depending on the industry. Maybe there are billions sloshing around, but in most companies, that's not going to be the case. And so it will be important at some point, especially if the company is going to build their own model and set up their own server farm and buy thousands of GPUs from NVIDIA, then you may want to be asking that ROI question. But if you're in an experimentation mode and hopefully leveraging other infrastructures that are out there, it's not the time to ask ROI questions. The questions that you may want to ask are things like, how is the company using AI? Are there vendors that are currently supporting the company, or how are you thinking about that? How are you thinking about running experiments? Are you using AI in the front office, in the back office, in developing and launching products, in operational capabilities such as R&D and supply chain? Which functions are experimenting? Is there a responsible AI policy? Have you thought about a framework to ensure that people know when and how they should be using AI within the company, but you don't want a policy that stops them from experimenting. You just want a policy that thinks about safeguarding data leakage and safeguarding the company's brand in case you were launching something out in the external world that, like a chat bot that asked really inappropriate questions, as we've seen the case study for. So those kinds of questions.
That's great. I didn't even think to ask, are there questions that boards should not be asking right now? So I will say I'm monitoring some of the chat questions, and your comments on ROI questions really did address one of our participants' questions, the one that came in from Naveen about the use of ROI at this stage. So very helpful, Laurie. I'm going to jump in before we go to Nora to share a potential question for the C-suite when it comes to training and reskilling. I think it's important to ask them how they're leveraging training and reskilling as part of their AI adoption plans, because if they're not thinking about that, then that can have a tremendous morale impact if people fear their jobs are going to be lost and the company doesn't have a plan to help prepare them and groom them for the new jobs that will be generated by AI. So I just think that's an important thing out there to make sure you want to be satisfied that your CEO and chief people officer, or whatever title your HR team has in your company, is thinking through these upskilling problems as subsequent steps in their AI adoption plan. Nora, any questions you think that should be asked by the board of their C-suites?
I think you guys have covered them, and I can't stress enough that just the use of some framework, and it can be basic, just your 2x2 matrix, Laurie was kind of hinting at it, is what we're doing gonna result customer facing, or not customer facing? And then is it from the tops down, or is it the bottoms up? Just a 2x2 matrix, almost anyone will do it. That way, the problem with AI is like world hunger. When you start talking about it, it's like the ocean, it's like everywhere. Or God, there was no beginning, there was no end. And so to have some sort of framework to say, this is how we think about it, just a shortcut way, so then we can stay in some quadrant of this is what we'll be doing. That's really aided the boards that I'm on, because in the beginning it was like the elephant. Everybody could see the ear or the tail, and no one could really understand the whole thing. But now we have frameworks. So in one board, for example, I'll just give you what we did is we listed every single function. And again, this is just for the generative part of AI. And I know for this audience, you don't have to know that generative is just a subset of machine learning, which is just a subset of AI. So there's AI embedded in processes. Like when we do risk management, or we have McKinsey come in looking at M&A, there's a lot of AI that's being used. But when we were looking at the generative part of AI, like using a chatbot or a GPT-like structure, we listed all of our functions, and then we made Harvey balls of what it was most applicable for. So it's kind of like marketing and customer support were really high, but then and software engineering was high, but then we had lower ones. And so we kind of had a divining rod of where we thought the oil was, and we try to put our resources that way. So it might be one thing that you might want to consider as a board of, instead of random acts of experimentation everywhere, which you might want, it depends on how many people you have and what you do. There are some frameworks available that show you by industry and by function where the money in efficiency is and where the money in effectiveness doing the right thing is. So you might want to invest in making your own map or buying a map.
Nora, the only thing I want to add, because you said I was supposed to counter you on things. I've heard a number of case studies where a company said, here's where we're going to focus because here's where we think the biggest bang for the buck will be. And then it's come from a different place. And the example that I will give is most people thought it was going to be in document generation, summarization, and data imagery. And it turned out to be in coding. They thought, oh, we have really good programmers, and so we're not going to really get a big bang for the buck in code generation, and they're not really going to need it because they're so fast and good anyway. And that was where they got the huge productivity increase. And back to Patrick's point about human labor replacement, I've heard a lot of people saying, oh gosh, I guess I should tell my kid not to major in computer science because they're all going to go away. Not the case at all. It's the first draft, and they found that the most advanced programmers in some companies are the ones who like it the most. In others, it's the junior programmers who don't really know the company's framework, and so they're seeing tremendous benefit in both. And there were a lot of companies who thought that they were not going to see interest from the employee base or the productivity gains for the programmers, and they've found incredible leaps in productivity.
So I actually do agree with that. So I think one of the theories of the case is let the flowers bloom, and whatever one gets healthiest and fastest, then we'll put resources. Other people with low resources said, I don't have enough to let them bloom. So my only point is just have a theory of the case. And the theory of the case might be, hey, just use it and then report in every once in a while and somebody will watch you. Or the theory is, why don't we just use it over here in technical support because of some reason, and then we'll open it up to the rest of the company. I will say those companies that try to restrict it, I don't think, it's just like shadow IT. I mean, people have their own servers under their desks, etc. So I don't think that's a winning strategy. I think you have to, unlike other IT things, normally like SAP and Salesforce, it gets rolled out from IT. We have a change management, etc. This thing, just every single employee just started using pretty much that first month. So I think trying to control it too much, but also to have some sort of organization around your chaos is, so there's some balance. And as you know, a board is a board, the companies are all different. Your mileage will vary, but at least have a theory of the case, which might be, we don't need a theory of the case until we decide. On your engineering thing, one of the things I saw the other day in a meeting is the translation. You know, when after you code and then you translate into 7,000 languages, and so they got it from like 3 weeks to 4 days. It did really good. There is an editor at the very end, but the editor didn't have much to, you know, we had I forgot how many languages, 40 or 70 languages. So there are some really low hanging fruit that your companies are proud of.
And no one likes documenting code. So there's it's a big win.
Yeah, I wonder, I hated that. Everyone hates it.
We are about the point now that is my favorite part of any of these discussions. It's where we start fielding the questions from this amazing audience of ours. So I've got the first batch of questions that I'll throw out, and you can take as many of them as you want or none at all. And I'll also say that we've gotten a question from Sandra about, are you aware of any good ethics frameworks for responsible AI? That's one. I already mentioned that Naveen asked about whether and how you should measure ROI on AI adoption. Henry asked about whether anyone is familiar with an AI app that's specifically focused or geared toward boards and their roles that could help us with this effort. And then a question from Almaka about how are executives addressing AI redress for customers? I'm not sure whether that's chatbot help desks. And actually, I'll throw one other question out there, also from Sandra, the question about existential threats. Does anyone think that generative AI poses an existential threat? And if so, what do we do about it? So those are just some light topics for you to tackle any piece of that if you're interested. Anyone, any volunteers?
Do you want to start, Laurie? You want me to start? I'm happy to.
Go ahead, Nora. Go ahead.
The framework, the best I saw came out of the World Economic Forum.
Mhm.
So, but I don't know if that's best, but that's the one I'm more familiar with, that most of the people that I interact with cite, and then they modify it a bit for theirs. So Laurie, I'd be interested if you had others of those.
I have seen quite a few, and of course, don't forget the US government has
Oh
come
yeah.
up with one as well, and so we have to pay attention to that one. But I agree the World Economic Forums is quite excellent. But I think at least the high-level framework that has been set up by the US government is useful to at least bucketize the kinds of things that you need to be thinking about.
Yeah, I'll emphasize that as well. I was on the Pentagon's Responsible AI Oversight Board before I retired. The principles that came out of there I thought were general enough. And I've also seen companies like Microsoft's Responsible AI principles. They are very similar. So they're that broad and universal. I think for any company, either one of those sets would be a good starting point that you could modify for your line of effort.
That's a good point. Just do research by looking at the leading companies like NVIDIA. The people in it have started to publish theirs on their website. It's like early days of ESG.
Yeah,
I wouldn't
and
say
you could
copy
ask
that.
ChatGPT to find this stuff and
Actually,
create a responsible AI framework for you,
Tell it.
right? I mean,
Yeah.
that's the beauty, is letting them take a stab and doing the first draft for you.
True.
So we don't have to do that.
Exactly.
And as I mentioned, there's the organization C2PA, which is an open technical standard for publishers, creators, and consumers for the ability to trace the provenance. So there's another, you're seeing pieces of it. There's the high-level frameworks, and then there's each piece of what makes responsible AI and the groups that are getting together to tackle it.
Super.
And part of this goes to that other question about existential threats. The principle, every science fiction novel or movie ends with these computers turning on their creators and taking over the world. And so, but it's something worth thinking about. Like, what steps do we take to prevent that from happening? And if almost all the responsible AI principles that you see out there have some safeguards in place to address that, perhaps not at that true societal existential level, but at every level you need to have safeguards built in. So I think there's some interplay between those.
And, I think the existential threat is what happens to trust, right? When everything could be fake and it's so easy to create a fake. And the difference now, as I said, the phishing attempts are not, hi, I'm stuck in Ethiopia with bad spelling. The new phishing attacks are incredibly credible, knows about you, knows about your company, knows about your interests, and can target very, very clearly. I'm sure all of you have seen the voice fakes of the CEO leaving a voicemail to someone saying, hey, please transfer money from this account to this other account. The tools to generate fakes are unfortunately incredibly good. And so a complete lack of trust is a huge existential threat.
Yeah, you baited me into it, Laurie. You did it. Now you're going to make me bring deep fakes up.
I knew you love that topic, Patrick.
No, that's the thing that keeps me up at night is the concept of deep fakes. As a lawyer, I'm concerned about deep fake evidence in courts. I think it's coming. It's already there. But more importantly, as citizens, we should all be concerned about the destabilizing factor of deep fakes on society. Disinformation, fake news, election interference. These can be devastating, and we're headed into a presidential election year here in the United States. This is really important stuff for our society, and we should all be worried about it. Have you seen the videos that Sora can create? That's the brand newly released OpenAI capability. It's astounding what can be created, and it just goes to your point that these deepfakes are so good, so convincing, and so easy and cheap to make. You now no longer know what to believe, and that is a problem.
One anecdote, I'm sure you saw that we got briefed on it by the FBI and the board, where it was some company and they transferred a lot of money based on a Zoom call like this. So I'm on a Zoom call, I see and talk to Laurie, I see and talk to you, Patrick. We're, maybe I'm accounts payable, you're the vendor, we know each other, and I transfer it, and it was wrong. And so we went through a whole thing. At the end of the day, the reason I'm giving you the anecdote, you're just talking about deep fakes. So we're talking about prevention. And one of the things they said in our personal life, I'm sure you already do it, is that secret password before sentence, like you and your spouse have, like someone that would ask you to transfer money, if they don't have that word in there without you asking it, then so it was really funny. It went back to the old school. That was one of the ways around it, was if they didn't know this thing.
See, Nora, these are the exact sort of tips that we are all hungry
But you never write it down. And so now my husband and I actually have one. It's funny, if you say this sequence of words, then I know that it's actually him. But so back on your thing, ROI, we did. I was pretty saddened. No one knew the internet model, but it turned out to be ads. So that's kind of the sad part. I'm hoping that if this turns out to be ads, I don't know what happens to the data and the sanctity of the data. I don't know. So ROI, I wouldn't ask early. And then for boards themselves, I know Diligent, Onboard, and BoardVantage are building in AI tools. I don't know how great. Diligent, I think, was the first one to say, look, if you're interested in this kind of company, we can help you on information. It sometimes was a pain in the neck because you're just in the portal to get your data, get your stuff, and get out. But so I think we're going to have things embedded in our portals. I don't know of a specific board one. Maybe you do, Laurie, of something that specifically helps us.
I have not seen one, and I think we're still in early days, so it's not clear. I'm just reading through the comments, which are fantastic, and people are giving links to of different things in the comments. So first of all, what a great group on this call. I'm finding it fascinating reading all the suggestions and links that are being provided in the comments. So this is this is fabulous. They're offering all kinds of different opportunities, but no, in preparation for this, I was looking online to see, hey, somebody come up with something great for boards, a kind of a toolkit, or which is why I think this program is so important, because I don't think one exists that goes through some of the things that we have been talking about. And, you know, Nora is the one who gave me the idea to go back to my board saying, hey, why aren't we using AI to summarize all the earnings analyst reports, which was a great one, and we hadn't thought of it. So I think it's going to be discussions like this one that are going to bring the fruits of everyone on this call in terms of sharing ideas together. So I'm loving this. I'm loving reading all the comments with all the great links. So I hope we're able to capture all those.
Yeah, we are about coming up to our wrap-up time, and I want to give each of you a chance for a final departing thoughts. So I want to turn it over to each of you for any takeaways or final thoughts that you have. Let's go to Nora, you first.
Well, you sure don't want to do Laurie, because she comes first in the alphabet if you count backwards. Final thoughts. No, the most impactful book, thank you for asking about what book. The most I would ask me, if I were to meet me, what are the sources that I use? I use A16Z podcast. They're incredible. And they're an investor in that big French firm that Microsoft invested in today. You saw that. So that, just search for the AI content. They cover a lot of things, but theirs is incredibly good. In fact, they had a whole, I don't work for them or anything, but they had a whole series of events on AI where all the people that you hear of were there, and they had each session recorded, and I OD'd on that. I listened to it twice. I'm sure you've already read, it's an oldie but a goodie, AI Superpowers by Kai-Fu Lee. And that was the best book for me, hands down, if you want to go from zero to understanding how it works and some of the practical applications of it. Obviously, things have progressed since he's written the book. I understand that. But if you want the foundations, like when you were talking about Ant and how they do a loan in 2 seconds, you can see the use cases for that. And let me think, I'll think of a third source that's top of mind. But Laurie, why don't you give your advice?
I was just going to look, because AI for All that Fei Li started, that I have been on the board of for a long time, was developing content for educators around AI. And have some really, we're developing content. I was trying to see if it is online or not. But I think they have been also placing AI trained folks into enterprises. And I know a number of my companies have taken advantage of hiring folks out of there. The other thing I was going to mention, people were saying, how do we get started? You know, as daunting as it is, if you're not a computer scientist, I think you've got to just download the apps and start playing with them. You know, I created a bunch of fun images with some of the early OpenAI tools. I downloaded ChatGPT, but I am addicted to Perplexity. And I will tell you one experiment that someone told me, and it was great because it was a materials science professor who came to me and said, and this was literally weeks ago, "Oh my God, have you tried Perplexity? I use it all day long for all of my research. And if you just download the app, type in who is Nora Denzel, who is Laurie Yoler, you're going to do it for yourself. It is the best written bio I've ever seen. So it gives you a quick example of summarization. And for my bio, I was blown away because it mentioned things about me that I had only shared in interviews like this and videos I had never written in a bio. And it was very accurate. It was the things I'm really passionate about and do in my spare time. I had never put that in a written bio before. And so I don't know if it determined that from either webinars or other video or based on the organizations I was involved in, but it gives you a really quick idea of how something can go across, create a really accurate summary, and then give you all the sources. And so it was just a great example because I know for some people they're thinking, okay, I don't have time to really do a lot of coding at night and really get to know how to become the best prompt engineer, although you might want to. And there's cheat sheets for prompt engineering that you may want to try, but I think everyone has to just start playing with these tools. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to provide as much value when talking to your companies about this.
Thank you, Laurie. Before I close out, I want to just turn to our sponsor, Nicholas from Cooley.
Sure.
He has anything to close out with.
I appreciate this. I just to react to what Laurie said, I guess just at a very high level, at the end of the day, the core duties of boards, have not changed here, right? As a matter of law, everything that boards did prior to generative AI still apply. I think the difference, though, is that this technology is a shock to our kind of collective systems, right? It kind of has grown at a rate that nothing else has before. And so this is really the first time that collectively boards need to think about a new technology in a brand new way. And our systems, our legal systems, are struggling to catch up, right? We have processes in place that are really good at handling certain things, but not brand new technologies at scale. And so that's kind of the challenge and the promise of AI. The last thing I'd say just is about risk. And I think we've talked a lot about deepfakes and like that is a big issue. The thing that I'm worried about the most, though, is not so much deepfakes. We'll eventually find ways of finding who the crooks are. It's data governance. We're producing so much data that companies simply may not be aware of. And Laurie, what you just said about, wow, there's a summary about stuff that I kind of forgot about. That is going to happen to companies. And that's going to leave a record that a lot of companies are really not prepared to deal with. And as a public companies lawyer, that's what keeps me up. That's what actually keeps me up at night more than deepfakes, right? So Patrick,
thank you so much, Nicholas. And Laurie and Nora, thank you so much for your amazing expertise and insights that you were willing to share with us today. We're so grateful. I want to give a shout out to our NorCal team, Lisa and Kate and Danielle, who are amazingly supportive of this AI and technology cohort. You're awesome. And to all of you out there for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us today. Thank you. Look forward to seeing you next time.